The sound of wheels striking the metal floor echoed sharply as the man stepped through the aircraft door. White light from the first-class cabin reflected off his polished Italian leather shoes. Everything in this place, from the scent of expensive leather to the faint pour of champagne, radiated luxury. Yet within minutes, that silence would be torn apart, and the world would witness one of the most revealing moments about how people truly treat one another. Ethan Miles, 42 years old, founder and CEO of Horizon Airways, one of the 3 largest airlines in the United States, boarded the plane with composed confidence. His light grey suit, the subtle gleam of a Patek Philippe watch under his sleeve, and the Italian leather briefcase in his hand made him look like any other accomplished businessman. Only one thing set him apart: the color of his skin. Seat 1. Ethan's usual spot was already occupied. A white family of 4 had taken over the entire front row. The father, Thomas Whitmore, a well-known Manhattan attorney, was reading the news on his iPad. His wife, Linda, a surgeon with a cold expression, was fixing their daughter Emma's hair, the girl 16. Their 12-year-old son, Noah, sat with headphones on, absorbed in his game. Ethan stopped and politely held up his ticket. "Excuse me, seat 1A is mine." Thomas didn't look up, only glanced sideways as if addressing a lost attendant. "You're mistaken, my friend. Coach is in the back." His voice was even but laced with icy contempt. A few passengers nearby looked up, the soft clinking of cutlery paused, and the air shifted thin as glass. Ethan stood tall, calm, his eyes unwavering. "I don't believe so. My ticket clearly says row 1, seat A." Linda offered a thin smile, half pity, half irritation. "There must be an error in the system. You should ask the flight attendant. She'll show you to the right place." The right place, those 2 words echoed in Ethan's mind like a bitter reminder. Since childhood in Detroit, he had heard them too many times. "This isn't your place. Your place is at the back." He had spent 20 years ensuring no one could ever say that to him again. Yet today, on the very aircraft bearing the logo he had built, those words returned sharp and cold as a blade. A flight attendant approached Melissa Grant, 38, face perfectly made up, her smile practiced over thousands of flights. "Good afternoon, sir. It seems there's been a small mix-up. Let me check your ticket." Ethan handed it over. She examined it for longer than necessary, tilting it under the light, as if searching for signs of forgery. Meanwhile, the Whitmores were never asked for proof. "Mr. Whitmore has flown first class for over 20 years, Linda said, softly but firmly. "There must be a system glitch." Melissa nodded almost immediately in agreement. She turned to Ethan, her voice gentle, but lowered, as if speaking to someone who had made a mistake. "Sir, to avoid confusion, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in premium economy. I assure you, you'll still receive excellent service." Her smile faltered slightly as their eyes met. What Ethan saw wasn't professionalism, but a choice she had decided whom she believed. Whispers began to spread among the passengers. He must be on the wrong flight. How did security let him in here? The murmurs were small but sharp, slicing through the air like razors. Ethan took a slow breath, silent. Not from fear, but from observation. Every glance, every reaction, every forced smile, each one revealed the unfiltered truth of how the world still worked, no matter who believed it had changed. He remembered his mother's words. "When you choose to fight, do it with purpose. Don't fight to win. Fight to change something." He could end this scene with a single phone call, but he didn't. Inside the cabin, the air hummed softly from the vents. Melissa stood there, her smile stiffening. Would you like me to help take your bag down? Ethan glanced at her name tag, Melissa Grant, and shook his head lightly. No need. I'll take care of it myself. His tone was calm, low, but his eyes carried a fire. The fire of a man who had walked through countless closed doors, and this time he wanted to see who would burn themselves down. In the row behind Emma, the 16-year-old daughter watched quietly. The man didn't look like an intruder. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like someone being humiliated in a place that prided itself on sophistication. For a brief moment, shame flickered in her eyes, a feeling her parents didn't notice. She turned away, unable to watch, yet that image would stay with her long after the flight ended. Ethan remained standing ticket in hand, no one defending him, surrounded only by the complicit silence of 40 people. He could hear his own heartbeat, each pulse, deepening the ache inside him, not from losing a seat, but from realizing that no amount of money or success could ever buy true respect. Melissa's tone shifted sharper now. Sir, if you don't move, I'll have to call security. Thomas crossed his arms and spoke loudly enough for the cabin to hear. I think that's enough. Someone without a first-class ticket shouldn't delay our flight. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the cabin. That's right. Call security. I have places to be. The wave of prejudice swelled cold, merciless, and powerful. Ethan looked around. Every pair of eyes avoided his. Everyone chose the comfort of silence. In that moment, he understood justice never begins with a crowd. It always begins with one person willing to stand alone. He nodded slightly, his voice calm, almost unnaturally so. If that's the case, I'll go. No one knew where he was going. No one knew that, as he stepped away from seat 1A, a quiet earthquake had begun, not just for this flight, but for the entire American aviation industry. As he walked down the aisle, the light from the window reflected off the glass, catching Melissa's relieved exhale, Thomas's smug grin and Linda's self-satisfied gesture as she smoothed her daughter's hair as if restoring the natural order of the world. Only one person saw something different, Emma. She watched the man walk away, his expression calm, his eyes still as a lake before a storm. And somehow she knew everything had just changed. Outside, the aircraft door sealed shut, and the seatbelt sign blinked on. Over the sunlit sky of Los Angeles, what seemed like an ordinary flight was about to write a new page in history, born from a first-class seat, and a man forced to leave the one he owned. What no one in that cabin knew was that they had just insulted the very man who owned the sky they were about to fly through. The air in the first-class cabin was thick enough to be cut with a knife. Every movement, every sound felt sharp and brittle. Ethan Miles still stood there alone in the most luxurious section of the plane that carried the logo of Horizon Airways, the company he had built from the ground up. He said nothing, but his silence unsettled people more than any argument could. Chief Flight Attendant Melissa Grant straightened her uniform, trying to keep her professional smile, yet her eyes avoided Ethan's. She told herself she was in a difficult position, though deep down she knew what was really happening. In front of her stood a black man, dressed in an elegant suit, composed and articulate, yet occupying a seat she had grown accustomed to associating with different faces, whiter, wealthier, more appropriate for the image she believed first class should represent. So Melissa began her voice, steady, carefully polite. I understand this may be a misunderstanding. The system occasionally has errors. I just want to make sure you're seated correctly, so we can depart smoothly. Ethan looked at her calmly. And where do you believe my correct place is? The question stopped her short. Her smile wavered. "I didn't mean it like that," she said quickly, her tone higher than before. "I'm only trying to help." From behind, Thomas Whitmore interjected his voice, carrying the self-assurance of someone used to defining order. "She's just doing her job, my friend. Don't make it harder for her. We've flown first class for 20 years and never seen a mix-up like this. Clearly there's a mistake somewhere." His wife Linda nodded and added gently, though, with unmistakable arrogance, "I'm sure the system's at fault. Perhaps your ticket was printed wrong." "Do you have a receipt?" Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but then he realized something no one was actually asking. They weren't seeking answers, only confirmation of what they already believed. To them, he wasn't a successful businessman. He wasn't someone who belonged there. He was merely out of place. A few passengers nearby began to take a closer look. A middle-aged man in seat 3A shook his head and muttered to his wife, "So annoying. These days everyone thinks they deserve first class." The woman replied quietly, but loud enough for Ethan to hear, "Probably a fake ticket. You can tell just by looking." Ethan didn't react. Every whisper was a needle. But he was used to them. They didn't make him angry anymore, only sad that after all his work, all his awards, all the years of climbing from nothing, he could still be seen as someone who didn't belong. In seat 4, see a young white woman with brown hair named Olivia sat frozen. She watched Ethan with hesitation. Part of her wanted to speak up. The other part was afraid of becoming the next target. Her silence small, as it was told Ethan something the fear of speaking up is what allows prejudice to live on. Melissa checked the ticket again, searching for any way to end the awkwardness. "Mr. Miles, to avoid delaying the flight, perhaps you'd be more comfortable sitting temporarily in premium economy. I'll make sure you're well taken care of." Her smile was thin as a thread. Ethan glanced around, seeing the waiting stares, the impatient sighs. Thomas tilted his chin and said to his wife, loud enough for others to hear, "Finally someone's being reasonable." Only his daughter Emma looked down, her face flushed with shame she didn't fully understand. Why could people act like this, just because of skin color? She clenched her hands, wanting to say something, but when she met her father's cold gaze, she fell silent. That silence, pure yet helpless, was the perfect image of a generation taught to be polite, but never taught to be just. Ethan tightened his grip on the ticket. In his mind appeared the image of his mother, the woman who had once worked as a janitor at this very airport, who had been thrown out of a lounge for sitting in the wrong area. She had only smiled then and told him as a boy, "It's all right, Ethan. One day you'll own the whole plane." And now he did, yet he was still being forced out of his own seat. A bitter irony only Amorica could write. Melissa kept her tone calm, but she could feel the room behind her. The crowd was on her side. Thomas was pushing, and first class demanded order. She no longer saw the man in front of her as a customer, only as a problem to solve. "Sir, I need you to move now. We can't take off as long as you're standing here." Her voice sharpened. The cabin went silent. Thomas stood up, his voice loud and authoritative. "We've been patient long enough. If he doesn't leave, I'll call security myself." The whispers grew into a wave. "Call security? How did he even get up here? I don't feel safe." A man in an expensive suit added, "Check his credit card. I bet it's fake." Those words poured gasoline on the fire. The air seemed ready to explode, but Ethan didn't move. His eyes swept across the cabin, Melissa frozen. Thomas standing with the arrogance of victory, Linda nodding smugly, and the rest avoiding his gaze. Then in the last row, an older black man sat quietly by the window. He said nothing. Ethan understood that look. It was the look of someone who had survived by staying silent a generation that had endured so their children could stand taller. But silence is another kind of pain, and Ethan knew that today he couldn't be silent. He drew a slow breath, his voice low but steady. "I understand. Thank you, Melissa. I'll go." A collective sigh filled the cabin. Melissa smiled with relief. Thomas let out a satisfied whistle. Linda smoothed her hair, and several passengers lowered their heads back to their newspapers, as if the problem had been neatly resolved. Only Emma kept watching the man, her eyes filled with both guilt and admiration. Ethan walked slowly toward the back of the plane. Each step held down a surge of anger rising in his chest. He didn't need to shout. He only needed to act. As the door separating first class from the rest of the plane closed behind him, Melissa exhaled in relief. She believed she had handled the situation well. Thomas believed order had been restored. The other passengers believed they had stood on the right side. None of them knew that just a few rows back, the man they had humiliated was unlocking his phone, scrolling to a contact with two simple words: Sarah Lang, Deputy CEO. He paused for a second, took a deep breath, and pressed call. His voice was calm and deep. "Sarah, this is Ethan. Code red. We've got a serious problem." On the other end, Sarah stayed silent for exactly 1 second before her tone shifted completely. "Understood, sir. I'll take care of it immediately." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. The fire had been lit, and this time it would burn down the system that had mistaken silence for order. The engines began to hum. The familiar mechanical sounds of first class formed a careful symphony. Crystal glasses lightly touching seat belts, clicking into place, soft conversation threaded through practiced smiles. No one noticed that at the very back of the cabin, the man they had just driven away sat in silence, but not in surrender. Ethan Miles didn't get angry, he simply observed. He sat in the last row of first class, where the light was softer and people were less likely to turn around. The pane of glass before him reflected a face, so calm, it was almost frightening. Inside a storm was gathering. The phone in his hand still glowed. The words, Sarah Lang, Deputy CEO, remained on the screen. He had sent a brief message. Code red confirmed. Ground the flight activate protocol. Everything deployed on its own legal communications, human resources, and risk management. A network of power began to move, silent, yet precisely coordinated, just like the man who had set it in motion. Up front, first class was regaining its poise. Thomas Whitmore had poured more wine and folded his arms, telling legal war stories to his wife in a booming voice. Linda smiled, adjusted her hair, and looked satisfied that she had helped resolve a situation. Melissa was informing the captain that the matter had been handled. None of them knew that in a few minutes they would become the center of a global media earthquake. Ethan rested his head against the seat and half closed his eyes. Memories flooded back like film running in reverse. He remembered as a child standing outside a convenience store while his mother was pushed out for looking suspicious. He remembered the first time he was invited to a venture capital meeting, and the doorman stopped him to ask, "Who are you delivering to?" He remembered that cold feeling, not from the weather, but from other people's eyes, as if he were walking into a world that was not meant for him. Years passed, and he became a leader, yet that past remained hidden in every breath. And today it returned in the sky over America, on the very plane that bore his name. The female captain's voice came through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We will depart in a few minutes. Ethan opened his eyes. Another notification appeared on his phone. Ground control acknowledged delay authorization requested. He typed back, "Approve technical issue. Execute quietly." Outside the cockpit, the captain received an internal signal. His glance flicked toward Melissa. "The system reports a minor technical fault. We need to wait for verification before takeoff." Melissa hesitated. What fault? Unknown orders from the center. The captain's tone was even, but his eyes did not leave the phone, pulsing with the words, CEO Directive Priority 1. Meanwhile, the passengers began to grow irritated. Thomas threw a sour look. "Another hiccup. I bet that man is slowing the whole flight down." Linda shook her head. "I knew it. People like that always cause trouble." "A man in seat 3. A chimed in. "If only they screened more carefully. Who knows how some people manage to buy first class?" One comment followed another, a small wave of arrogance and blindness. Only Emma Thomas's daughter sat quietly with her eyes fixed on the table. In her mind, the picture of the man who had been sent away was still clear. His eyes held no hatred, only sadness so deep it made her feel ashamed of her own family. At the back of the cabin, Ethan reopened his digital notebook. He was not logging sales or shares. He was logging people behavior reactions, how staff managed a crisis, and how passengers carried themselves. He called it the human audit. Every time he traveled incognito, he wrote a new chapter. Today's chapter read, Flight 2810, the first class divide. The first line he wrote slowly. When a system stops valuing human dignity, it needs a restart, not with code, but with conscience. Ethan paused and smiled faintly. He did not need to shout, he did not need revenge. He only needed to show the world the truth, bare and undeniable. 5 minutes later, the captain's voice returned, reassuring passengers that they would return to the gate due to a technical issue requiring inspection. Sighs spread through the cabin. Thomas slapped the table. "Unbelievable. I have a meeting in New York tomorrow morning. Who is responsible for this?" Melissa leaned in, her voice, gentle but trembling. "Our apologies, Mr. Whitmore, we are working on it. We may be back at the gate in a few minutes." "It had better be a few minutes," he snapped. Ethan watched from a distance, his gaze steady with a cool glint. He knew that the patience of the self-satisfied was the best tool for exposing them. The plane began to turn back toward the runway. Melissa walked quickly to the rear, where Ethan sat, her voice low, but still formal, "Mr. Miles. I truly apologize if I was a bit blunt earlier. We were only trying to follow the rules." Ethan tilted his head slightly, his eyes no longer cold, only strangely composed. "You did exactly what this system taught you to do, and it is that very correctness that is the problem, Melissa." She stopped, uncomprehending. "I'm not sure what you mean." "You will understand," Ethan replied softly. The simple line was enough to send a chill through her. She turned away, heart pounding. She did not know who he was, but there was something in his voice, power calm, and a familiar weight that unsettled her. The plane stopped. The door opened. 3 security officers entered, followed by the executive director of JFK Airport, Janet Moore, whom Melissa had only seen in internal news bulletins. First class fell instantly silent. Janet walked straight to the back of the cabin and stopped in front of Ethan, her tone formal. "Mr. Miles, everything is ready. We apologize for what just occurred." The name Miles cracked like thunder through the sealed cabin. Thomas jerked his head up his face, draining of color. Linda went rigid. Melissa dropped the hand notebook she was holding. Ethan rose and adjusted his jacket, his voice low but carrying, "Good, please inform all passengers that this flight will pause. We need to talk about the meaning of the words, first class." In that moment, silence turned into fear. Those who had looked at him with contempt could only stare at one another, searching for answers in their confusion. Emma bowed her head and whispered to herself, "I knew it. I knew it." In the front row, Thomas swallowed hard. Linda turned to her husband, her voice shaking. "Who is he?" Thomas answered with a rasping whisper, "The man we just threw off his own plane." In the back, Ethan closed his eyes. In the quiet, he heard his heart beat clearly, strong and steady. He did not need to take revenge. He only needed to let justice speak in the language of truth. The flight had not taken off, but the journey of awakening for an entire industry, a society, and the people in that cabin had just officially begun. The air inside the first-class cabin seemed to solidify. The white light of the cabin reflected off pale, silent, and stunned faces. The wind howled outside the fuselage, stretching each second of silence, the heavy silence of too late realization. Ethan Miles stood in the center of the cabin, his posture straight, his eyes calm, his hand still holding the leather briefcase. He didn't need to raise his voice, because real power had never needed to shout. In front of him, Thomas Whitmore tried to force a smile, his voice trembling. "This must be a misunderstanding. I didn't realize you were Ethan," raised an eyebrow and interrupted. "No, you knew exactly who I was. The problem is, before you knew my name, you already knew what I was in your eyes." The entire cabin held its breath. Linda Whitmore lowered her head, her fingers interlaced tightly. Their daughter Emma's eyes filled with tears, unable to look at her parents. In the corner, Melissa Grant trembled. Her eyes were fixed on Ethan's face, unable to believe that the man she had just forced out of his seat was the founder of the airline she worked for. She could hear her heart pounding in her chest, not out of fear for her job, but because she realized she had betrayed the very values she once took pride in upholding. Her voice broke like a snapped wire as she tried to speak. I didn't know. I was just following protocol." Sir Ethan turned toward her, his gaze steady. "I believe you, and that is exactly what's most frightening, Melissa." He took a slow step forward, his voice even calm without anger, yet each word fell heavy as a hammer. "You did exactly what this system taught you to do. Assume, judge, and call it procedure. You don't need open discrimination, only a look, a word, and it's enough to push someone out of the place they belong." Melissa broke down in tears. Her makeup streaked as she cried. She tried to move closer to apologize, but Ethan raised his hand slightly. "You don't need to apologize to me. You should apologize to the passengers you've looked down on. The ones without titles, without suits, without a chance to prove they deserve respect." Janet Moore, the airport director, stepped forward, her voice formal and respectful. "Mr. Miles, we've prepared a private conference room, if you'd like to leave the plane." Ethan shook his head. "Not yet. I'll speak here. They need to hear it right now." He turned toward the passengers. Each one avoided his eyes, their heads lowered, as if guilt could be erased by silence. "I'm not standing here as a CEO. I'm standing here as someone who has been doubted, rejected, and told, 'You don't belong here.' And today, I heard that same sentence again from people flying on an aircraft that bears my name." The words seemed to shake the cabin itself, as though even the engines hesitated. A grey-haired man in the middle row stammered, "Sir, we didn't mean to." Ethan looked at him, offering a faint smile. Not mocking, not angry, just deeply sad. "No, you didn't mean to." And that's exactly why it keeps happening. Injustice doesn't need villains. It just needs enough people who don't care. In seat 4C, the young crewman Olivia, the only one who had hesitated, began to cry. Her sobs came out like a confession long suppressed. I saw it. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't say anything. I'm sorry. Ethan nodded softly, his eyes gentle now. Thank you. Sometimes courage isn't about standing against others, but standing against your own fear. He turned to Thomas, his tone lowering. Mr. Whitmore, I hear you're a lawyer. I'm sure you understand defamation and public discrimination. I won't sue you because lawsuits don't change the world, but I'll make sure your actions become a case study in every anti-bias training across the entire industry. Thomas bowed his head, speechless. Linda turned away, tears streaking down her face. Emma began to sob openly. Ethan stepped toward the aircraft door, his voice carrying one final time before leaving the cabin. I don't need respect because of my position. I need you to understand that dignity has no class of ticket. It isn't measured in money, but in how we treat one another. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. Those who choose silence when witnessing injustice are helping to create it. Next time you see someone pushed aside for not looking like one of us, remember this moment, because justice is never born from silence. He walked out, his tall figure, steady and unwavering. The door closed behind him, the sound like the final period to an age of arrogance. For a few minutes the cabin remained frozen. Then it broke into a low murmur. People began whispering, scrambling to excuse their behavior. We didn't know who could have guessed. He overreacted a little, didn't he? But every word was hollow echoes in a sealed metal shell. No one believed their own excuses anymore. Melissa sank into a seat, hands clutching her head. She hadn't just lost her job. She had lost faith in herself. What have I done? She whispered, tears soaking her uniform. In the front row, Emma still cried. She grabbed her mother's hand. Mom, why did we do that to him? Just because he doesn't look like us. Linda squeezed her daughter's hand, but said nothing. In her eyes, the eyes of a woman who had always believed she knew right from wrong, shame appeared for the first time. Outside the window, Ethan walked with Janet Moore down the mobile stairs. Sunlight caught his hair, wrapping him in a faint silver glow. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Behind him, a first-class cabin had just witnessed the collapse of the illusion of superiority and the birth of a new understanding. Justice doesn't wear a suit, and dignity doesn't need a boarding pass. In the emergency operations office of Horizon Airways at JFK Airport, phones rang non-stop. Messages from legal communications and public relations came flooding in. The story is spreading, urgent meeting required. Passenger videos are going viral. Other airlines are reaching out for official comment. Ethan read them all, then set his phone down and looked out the window. His plane still sat on the runway, motionless as if it too were reflecting on what had just happened. He smiled faintly, a sad but certain smile. If you want to change an entire system, sometimes you have to let it embarrass itself first. And in that moment, in the stillness of the room, Ethan Miles knew this was no longer about one flight. It was a wake-up call for the entire world. The noon wind streamed in through the jetway, carrying blistering heat and the distant roar of engines. Ethan Miles walked slowly, tall and composed, yet each step carried the weight of millions of eyes, not only those who had witnessed what happened on the plane, but those of a society about to examine itself. Janet Moore, the airport director, hurried to keep pace, her voice taut. "Mr. Miles, I have contacted the operations center. They are ready to take you to a private conference room if you'd like to avoid the media." Ethan gave a slight shake of his head, his eyes never leaving the silver fuselage before him. "No, Janet, I do not want to hide. Sometimes to change something, you have to let light shine directly on the wound." His voice was low, steady, and decisive. In that moment, Janet looked at him and understood this was not a chief executive officer in anger. This was a man about to rewrite the rules of an entire industry. Ethan stopped beneath the wing and pulled out his phone. An internal contact list filled the screen. Legal HR Media Relations Board of Directors Civil Rights Division. He tapped the first line. Sarah Lang's voice, the Deputy Chief Executive Officer, came brisk and tight with worry. "So the media is aware. A passenger live-streamed the video. It is spreading at a record pace." "Good," Ethan answered without hesitation. "Good, Sir," Sarah faltered. "We do not hide. We do not try to control the media. We do not take videos down. Let people see. Every word, every look." The silence on the line stretched until Sarah could hardly breathe. "Are you certain, Ethan? This could rock the entire airline, the stock price." If the value of a company depends on its ability to cover up mistakes, it deserves to fall. Ethan's voice was steel. "I want the following orders carried out immediately," he continued. "Suspend the entire flight crew of Flight 2810 and place them under urgent investigation. Contact the Federal Civil Rights Division and release a public incident report within 60 minutes. Public Sarah nearly blurted, "Yes, we will not call this an unfortunate incident. We will call it by its name, discrimination." The other end went quiet. Then Sarah answered, her voice unsteady but firm. "Understood, Mr. Miles. I understand." Ethan looked up. Sunlight flashed on the cockpit glass, and he squinted. Another memory rushed in the first time he walked into a boardroom as a young engineer. They said, "You have talent, but your image does not suit a representative position." He smiled and asked, "You mean because I am black?" The room fell silent. In that moment, Ethan understood that true power didn't lie in a title, it lay in the right to redefine the standard. And today he would redefine the standard for aviation. Janet spoke carefully. "Would you like me to move the press out of the area? There are many reporters waiting in the concourse." "No, let them stay. I will see them but at the right moment." Ethan checked the time. "Now I need to speak with the people who brought us here." He turned and walked back to the plane. In the cabin, whispers died when the door opened. Melissa Grant stood near it, her face chalk white. Thomas and Linda Whitmore kept their heads bowed, their hands still clenched. Emma, their daughter, looked up, eyes red and wet. Ethan said nothing for a few seconds. He let the silence stretch long enough for each person to feel its weight. "I am not here to scold anyone," he began, his voice low and clear, "because what must change is not only what we do, but how we think." He looked directly at Melissa. "You followed procedure. But who wrote that procedure? People who believe there are types of customers more trustworthy than others. You are only a link in the chain." But today that link broke. Melissa burst into tears. Thomas cleared his throat, struggling to save face. "I apologize, Mr. Miles. If I had known you were, if you had known Ethan cut in, if I were only an engineer, a janitor, or a father taking his child to school, would you have treated me differently?" Thomas lowered his head. "I do not know. That is the problem. You do not know, and you do not want to know." He took out his phone and turned to Melissa. "Do you remember your interview 3 years ago?" Melissa looked up, startled. "Yes, I interviewed over video, correct. I personally interviewed you." She froze. "I hired you because you said something I have never forgotten. I want passengers to feel respected no matter who they are." He held her gaze. "Today you forgot that." "But I did not." She sobbed harder. Ethan did not look away. He spoke softly. "Melissa, you are suspended. Not because I want to punish you, but because I want you to have time to consider what respect truly means. When you understand that I will be the first to give you a second chance." He turned to the entire cabin. "I know many of you feel ashamed now. What I want is for that feeling to become action. Tomorrow, when you see someone belittled simply because they are different, remember this feeling. The feeling of being caught in the moment you became the problem you always believed only others had." His eyes found Emma, the only one who dared meet his gaze. "As for you, Emma, do not let adults teach you that silence is politeness. Silence in the face of injustice is not polite. It is complicity." The girl broke down, crying, and nodded again and again. Outside, the sun began to tilt. Light spilled through the window across Ethan's face, half bright, half shadow, as if marking the two halves of the world he was trying to reconcile. He spoke slowly, each word etched into the air. "Real power is not the ability to make people afraid. It is the ability to make people see." Then he turned to Janet. "Give me a microphone." Janet handed him a small mic tied to the cabin speakers. Ethan pressed the button, his voice carrying through the fuselage, not only through first class, but all the way to the last row. "Ladies and gentlemen on Flight 2810, I am Ethan Miles, Chief Executive Officer and founder of Horizon Airways. I want to apologize for our delay, but I will not apologize for the reason it happened. Today I witnessed how we, even with education and money, can lose what matters most, our humanity." He paused, his voice deepening with quiet force. "From now on, Horizon will not only fly across the sky, we will fly through prejudice." The cabin was utterly still. Ethan clicked off the mic, set it on the table, and turned away. As he left the plane, no one spoke. Only tight breaths, and the heavy silence of people who had just seen the true strength of justice, strength that does not need to shout, only to stand present. Outside, the wind rose, and against a blazing red sky, the sight of Ethan Miles striding toward the light became a symbol of what the world is about to relearn. Power is not for possession, it is for illumination. 7 hours after Ethan Miles stepped off Flight 2810, America was on fire. Not from conflict, but because of an 8-minute video, the footage of a black man being asked to leave his first-class seat, and then only minutes later, turning the world upside down. On social media, the hashtags #AllToSeatGate, Flying While Black, and Ethan Miles dominated the trending charts in just 3 hours. CNN, CNBC, and The Guardian opened their evening broadcasts with the same headline, "CEO removed from his own airline seat," and the answer that silenced an entire industry. At Horizon Airways headquarters in New York, the 49th floor glowed with screens. Public relations communications and legal managers crowded around the long table phones, in hand eyes, glued to a live counter ticking upward by the second one. 0.2 million, 3.8 million, 10 million. Sarah Lang, the Deputy Chief Executive Officer, entered the meeting room. Her face was pale with tension, but her voice stayed firm. "We've verified it. The clip is authentic, no edits. and Ethan has authorized the release of the full security footage from the aircraft. A member of the communications team gasped. What he wants it released, Sarah answered quietly, eyes steady. No, he wants transparency. Meanwhile, Ethan sat alone in a small temporary office at JFK Airport. Warm yellow light washed across his face, reflecting in his deep eyes, not angry but clear, razor-sharp. On the desk sat an open laptop, the screen filled with hundreds of messages of support from civil rights groups, journalists, and even passengers who had experienced similar discrimination. One email came from the NAACP, Mr. Miles. We are ready to collaborate on building a framework for anti-discrimination policy across the aviation industry. A message from the Chief Counsel read, "The board is in panic. The stock dropped 4% this morning, but the public is on your side." Ethan typed a short reply. "Do not manage the crisis. We do not need to hide. We need to make it right." In the conference room upstairs, the board members erupted in protest. "He just threw the whole airline into a storm. We've lost tens of millions over one minor incident. This is a public relations disaster." But when the screen displayed thousands of public comments from New York, Houston, Johannesburg, and Paris, the shouting softened. One comment enlarged across the display read, "It wasn't Ethan Miles who embarrassed the airline. It was the way you treated him." Sarah looked around the room and said clearly, "You're worried about losing money. He's worried about losing humanity." Today the world knows who truly runs this company, a human being, not a machine. At the same time, in a quiet corner of the internet, a short interview with Emma Whitmore spread at lightning speed. Standing outside the airport, eyes swollen from crying, she told a reporter, her voice trembling, I didn't know my parents were that wrong. I just remember when he said, 'Dignity has no class of ticket.' I felt so small. I wish I had said something. The words of a 14-year-old girl silenced social media. One user commented, "A child just understood what an entire industry forgot." In the days that followed, the uproar grew into a national movement. Other airlines issued statements one after another. We pledged to review our internal bias and discrimination policies. The government launched an investigation into passenger service procedures and implicit bias. On a late-night talk show, the host declared, "This isn't a story about a seat. It's a story about how society decides who deserves to sit where." 3 days later, Horizon Airways held an international press conference. Ethan stepped onto the stage, not in a suit, but in a simple white shirt. Behind him hung a banner that read, "Respect takes flight." The room fell silent as he spoke. I was asked to leave my own seat, but millions of others are pushed out of theirs every day unseen. He paused, took a breath, and continued, "I am not here to apologize for a few employees. I am here to apologize for a system that allowed indifference to become standard." Cameras flashed rapidly. A reporter called out, "Miles, are you planning to fire the entire flight crew?" Ethan smiled faintly. "No, I plan to retrain the entire industry." The next day, Horizon announced the Comprehensive Human Reform Program, the establishment of an independent civil rights oversight committee for aviation, mandatory bias awareness training for every employee from the CEO to the ticket counter agent, a 200% refund, and public apology for any passenger who experiences discrimination, and a new commercial cooperation requirement. Every partner airline must sign the Equality in Flight Pact to work with Horizon. The press called it the first declaration of justice in modern aviation. For Ethan, after the storm of attention, he chose to return to where it began, seat 1A. This time there were no skeptical glances, no gap between first class and first kind. A young flight attendant approached with a sincere smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Miles. What would you like today?" Ethan looked around the cabin where every passenger, no matter their color, age, or status, was being treated the same. He said softly, "I just want a cup of coffee. And an extra seat for compassion." Outside the window, a Horizon aircraft bearing its new logo, "Respect First, Always," lifted into a blazing sunset. Below, the city shimmered gold like a sea of mirrors. Ethan leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. Amid the fading roar of the engines, he could still hear his mother's voice. "When they push you from your seat, don't fight to get it back. Fight to restore its meaning." And this time, Ethan knew he had done exactly that. The screen faded to black-white letters appearing across it. The story of Ethan Miles inspired 18 airlines and millions of people around the world. Because justice does not take flight from anger. It takes flight from dignity. Headquarters of Horizon Airways, New York City. 6 in the morning dawn spilled through the glass panels and reflected off the walnut conference table, where dozens of journalists prepared for a press conference unlike any other. At the far end of the table, Ethan Miles sat still. His hands clasped, his eyes fixed on the golden-orange sky to the east. He said nothing quietly, waiting for the moment to open the door to the truth. Sarah Lang, the Deputy Chief Executive Officer, entered the room carrying a stack of folders nearly 2 inches thick. Her voice was hoarse from sleepless nights. "Ethan, I've compiled all the complaints from the past 4 years. 62% include elements of racial or class bias, but every one of them was labeled internal misunderstanding. Not a single case was fully resolved." Ethan wasn't surprised. He only asked, "And who signed off on those reports?" Sarah said nothing. She didn't need to. He already knew the answer because he had once signed them himself, back when he still believed Horizon's automated systems were transparent enough to operate without human intervention. That mistake had allowed prejudice to hide inside the algorithms within the very structure he had built in the name of fairness. Ethan exhaled slowly. If justice could be programmed, he said quietly, humanity would have no need for a heart. 8 in the morning. The conference doors opened. Hundreds of reporters packed the room, cameras flashing in rapid bursts. At the podium, the Horizon logo had been replaced with bold words, "The Truth Board." Ethan stepped forward. No script, no rehearsal. His voice was deep and resonant, each word heavy with meaning. "Today I am not here to defend Horizon. I am here to dissect it." Fingers flew across keyboards. Flashes blinked like lightning. He continued each sentence steady as a heartbeat. "For years I believed Horizon was the airline of the future, fair, pioneering, humane. But the incident on Flight 2810 proved one thing: we are not flying toward the future. We are falling." A few reporters looked up, the air thick as fog. Ethan placed his hands on the table, his voice dropping. "This is the internal report the board has buried for 4 years. It states clearly that employees of African, Latin, and Asian descent were classified as customer risk groups. They were instructed to undergo additional verification, have their credit cards rechecked, and were often reassigned seats if other passengers felt uncomfortable." A ripple of shock spread through the room. He emphasized, "That is discrimination not on paper, but in the bloodstream of the system." A reporter from CNN raised a hand. "Mr. Miles, are you implying that Horizon itself fostered racial bias. Ethan looked straight into the lens. Not just fostered it. We fed it with silence. The room fell absolutely silent. Sarah Lang lowered her head, fighting back tears. Ethan stepped to the screen and pressed a button. The large display lit up, showing videos, images, and internal documents, ignored complaints, mocking supervisor emails, and text messages between shift leads that read, "Keep that seat open for someone who looks more reliable." A female reporter whispered, "My God, this isn't just misconduct. It's a social crime." Ethan returned to the podium. I chose not to hide any of it, because if a CEO uses power only to protect reputation, he doesn't deserve to lead. I'm here to protect something else. Trust. He nodded to Sarah. She stepped forward, opening the file in her hands, her voice trembling but clear. Under Mr. Miles's directive, Horizon officially launches the Redemption Protocol. All employees, from flight attendants to regional directors, will undergo retraining on bias awareness and equality in service. Every discrimination complaint will be reviewed by an independent human rights council with the authority to suspend and prosecute. 15% of next quarter's profits will go to the Sky Dignity Fund, supporting victims of bias within the aviation industry. Applause began at the back of the room, faint at first, then grew into thunder. A BBC reporter stood up. "Mr. Miles, why didn't you step down as most leaders would in a crisis like this?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Because I didn't build Horizon to hide in the clouds. I built it to see the ground." After the press conference, the media erupted. An article in The Atlantic opened with the line, "For the first time in history, a CEO didn't use lawyers to defend himself, but used truth to redeem his company." On Twitter, people shared clips of Ethan's speech with the caption, "He didn't protect his company. He protected humanity." That afternoon, Ethan returned to JFK Airport. No reporters, no security entourage. He simply stood by the massive glass window, watching dozens of Horizon planes prepare for takeoff. An elderly janitor recognized him and approached hesitantly. "You're Mr. Miles, aren't you? Thank you for what you did. My daughter's a flight attendant. She told me that today, for the first time, she felt proud to wear her uniform." Ethan smiled and shook the man's hand, his eyes gentle. "Thank you. Tell your daughter the sky belongs to all of us." That evening, the national news aired unreleased footage from the internal cabin camera of Flight 2810, the part the public had never seen. The moment Ethan stood still, ticket in hand, while Melissa said, "Coaches that way." No shouting, no violence, just glances, smirks, and subtle nods, all magnified on the screen. The anchor's voice softened. "It doesn't take violence to destroy dignity. Only indifference." The final scene. Ethan sitting alone in his high-rise apartment, gazing at the city lights below. On the table lay a newspaper with the headline, "The Man Who Made the World Look in the Mirror." He gently set down his coffee cup and murmured, "Justice doesn't come from punishment. It comes from the courage to face the truth." Outside, Horizon planes crossed the night sky, carrying a new message for a new era: respect first, always. 3 months after the Seatgate scandal, spring arrived in America, but within the airline industry, the echo of the storm Ethan Miles had unleashed still lingered. There were no more explosive press conferences, no more headlines shaking the world. In their place came quiet yet sweeping reforms, and those were what Ethan cared about most. Morning at Horizon's training center on the outskirts of Atlanta. More than 300 flight attendants, managers, engineers, and supervisors filled the auditorium. On stage, a massive LED screen displayed the words, Redemption Protocol, the Human Renewal Program. Ethan did not appear as the CEO. He sat in the last row, dressed simply in a white shirt and grey trousers like an ordinary observer. No one in the room noticed that the quiet man sitting at the back was the one who had changed the entire foundation of Horizon's operations. On stage, a woman of Latin descent, Amelia Torres, Horizon's newly appointed Director of Human Rights, took the podium. Her voice was firm but warm. I'm not here to teach you how to apologize. I'm here to help us learn how to understand. Discrimination isn't always a shout. Sometimes it's a glance. It's the moment you choose silence instead of speaking up. Hundreds of eyes looked toward her. A young flight attendant in the front row raised a hand. But what if I'm afraid of losing my job? Amelia gave a sad smile and replied, When justice depends on fear, then we're no better than the system. Mr. Miles just broke. In the last row, Ethan nodded slightly. At noon, as the room broke for lunch, a small group of young employees recognized him. They approached hesitantly. A white trainee pilot about 25 wearing a badge that read, Marcus, spoke softly. Mr. Miles, I just wanted to say thank you. My father worked at Horizon for 20 years. He died from stress and pressure from management. He used to say, At Horizon we fly high but forget to look down. Now I see that you are helping us find our way back to the ground. Ethan smiled, shook Marcus's hand, and said, No, Marcus, I'm just helping you see yourselves again. The real change has to come from your generation. That afternoon, Ethan traveled to Washington, D.C. Inside the Capitol, the National Transportation Committee held a special session on justice in commercial aviation. Senators, civil rights representatives, and the CEOs of 5 major airlines were present. Ethan didn't bring a speech. He presented facts, numbers that didn't lie. In the past 5 years, he said, as he opened his laptop and projected a chart, 83% of discrimination complaints in aviation were closed within 72 hours without investigation. Of those, more than 60% came from passengers of color, yet only 8% were officially documented in industry reports. A middle-aged senator frowned. Mr. Miles, are you suggesting that all airlines are prejudiced? Ethan replied instantly, calm but sharp. I'm saying they chose not to see. The entire chamber fell silent. He continued, his voice unwavering. I'm not here to accuse anyone. I'm here to propose something, a new law, the Equal Skies Act, requiring every airline to establish an independent oversight body for discriminatory behavior and to publish quarterly data. A journalist seated in the back typed quickly, Miles doesn't say much, but every word cuts like a knife through the heart of the system. 3 weeks later, the Equal Skies Act passed with 87 votes in favor, nearly unanimous. It all began with one moment, a man being asked to leave his first-class seat. The nation called it the Justice Landing. At Horizon headquarters, Sarah Lang brought new updates. Ethan, other major airlines want to partner with us to implement our training model. The government wants to adopt the Redemption Protocol as a national standard. Ethan looked at her, his expression tired but bright with conviction. If they truly want to change, open the entire program. No patents, no licensing fees. Justice should never be proprietary. Sarah smiled. You really haven't changed, have you? I have, Ethan said quietly. I've just learned that instead of holding on to power, you share it. That evening, soft light reflected off the wall of Horizon's headquarters, where hundreds of photographs hung. Real faces, passengers who had written letters of thanks, employees once discriminated against, and children who now dreamed of becoming pilots. Ethan walked along the wall and stopped at one small photo, an 8-year-old girl beaming with joy, holding her first free ticket sponsored by Horizon. Beneath it, a handwritten line read, "Thank you for making the sky a place where everyone is welcome." Ethan placed his hand gently on the frame and whispered, "That's the real prophet." The next morning, he appeared unannounced in a flight attendant training classroom. No escort, no warning. He stood quietly at the back while the instructor played a training video showing a passenger denied service simply because he didn't look first class. The room was silent, eyes cast down. A young woman turned, saw him and stood up. "Mr. Miles, I just want to say today is the first time I've felt proud to wear this uniform." Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm and warm. "Don't be proud because you wear a uniform. Be proud because you carry humanity on every flight." That day, Horizon officially launched the Fair Skies Academy, the first aviation training program in the world, built on the foundation of human dignity. International airlines lined up to join. Universities added ethics in service to their curriculum. And Ethan simply stood back, watching quietly, like someone who had planted seeds and now saw the harvest. Late that night, as the city slept, Ethan went to his private airfield, where a Horizon plane bearing the company's new logo waited. Across the fuselage, illuminated by the floodlights, were the words, "We all belong here." He placed a hand on the cool metal and whispered, "There was a time when I only dreamed of sitting in seat 1A. Now I only hope everyone finds a seat of their own." The wind blew softly. The streetlights cast a gentle glow across his face, no longer tense, no longer angry, just the peace of a man who had seen justice take flight. And as dawn broke, the sky turned clear and blue, as if the storm had never been. But within it lingered the message Ethan had left in the first internal memo after the reforms. An airline doesn't just take people far, it must bring them closer. For Ethan, Miles' justice was never just a law to be passed. It was a system healed by the human heart. 4 months after the historic press conference, the world was no longer the same. Not because of gunfire or riots, but because of a shift in consciousness, the kind of change Ethan Miles had always believed to be humanity's greatest power. In Manhattan, the law office of Thomas Whitmore, the man who had once ordered Ethan out of seat 1A, now bore a sign reading "temporarily closed." Major clients had withdrawn their contracts en masse, not for legal reasons, but out of principle. Newspapers that once praised him as the lawyer who defined the elite now ran a colder headline, "The man who won every case, but failed the test of conscience." Thomas sold his luxury apartment and moved to the suburbs. In a brief interview with a local news station, he said only one thing: "That day, I thought I was defending order. Now I know I was only defending prejudice." His wife Linda lost her position as head of a prestigious hospital department. Hundreds of patients signed a petition demanding an investigation into bias in treatment. Their daughter, 14-year-old Emma Whitmore, became a symbol of awakening. On a national student television program, she said softly, "That day I stayed silent, and I learned that silence can hurt people too." The entire country fell quiet. A child had spoken a truth adults had long forgotten. In Los Angeles, Melissa Grant, the flight attendant who had made Ethan leave his seat, now lived in a small apartment far from the skies she had served for 15 years. Every morning she rose early, made coffee, and opened her laptop. She wrote daily entries in a blog titled "The Day I Forgot to See People." Her first post drew hundreds of thousands of readers. She offered no excuses, no pleas for forgiveness, only honesty. I didn't shout. I didn't insult. I simply doubted someone because they were different. And that's the worst kind of discrimination, because it wears the mask of politeness. 3 months later, Horizon invited her back, not as a flight attendant, but as a cultural training instructor for the next generation. The day she signed her contract, Ethan said only one line. "We don't need to be perfect. We just need to be brave enough to change." On television, the Washington Post ran a feature story titled "From Seat 1A to a Sky-Wide Revolution," when a CEO taught the world that power is not to be held, but to illuminate. At major airports, new signs appeared above the boarding gates. Respect is not an upgrade. It's the boarding pass for everyone. Ethan paid no attention to fame. He stayed away from talk shows, declined exclusive interviews, and refused all awards. Instead, he spent his time visiting Horizon's training centers across the country. At every stop, he asked the same question: "Who have you helped feel seen today?" One young employee once answered, "I'm not sure I made anyone feel special, but I apologized to a passenger after spilling coffee, and he thanked me like it really mattered." Ethan smiled. That's enough. Sometimes justice begins with a sincere apology. Late at night, on a flight back to New York, Ethan sat in seat 1A, the place where it had all begun. The soft cabin light fell across his face. A young flight attendant approached and said gently, "Mr. Miles, thank you for making us believe that doing what's right is more important than doing it fast." Ethan looked out the window. Outside, the night sky stretched endlessly, reflecting the journey he had walked from humiliation to awakening to justice. His voice was calm and warm as he replied, "It wasn't me who changed the sky. It was all of you." The aircraft cut through the clouds, leaving a glowing trail behind. And in that moment, Ethan Miles understood that every storm happens for a reason: to cleanse the air and to remind humanity to cherish the light after the rain. 1 year after the Seatgate incident, the noise had faded, but its legacy quietly soared with every Horizon Airways flight. The sky hadn't changed, only people had learned to see each other differently. That morning, Ethan Miles returned to the Fair Skies Academy. Laughter and conversation filled the courtyard. Hundreds of trainees in light blue uniforms were practicing new procedures, not how to pour champagne or perfect a bow, but how to listen to people. On stage, a young instructor shared her own story. "I used to think VIPs were the ones with money. Now I know VIP means anyone who deserves respect." Ethan stood among the crowd smiling. He was no longer the powerful CEO with billions at his command, but a quiet observer watching the justice he had planted take root. When the ceremony ended, a little girl of about 8 ran up to him, clutching a crayon drawing of a Horizon airplane soaring through the clouds. The words, "Respect first, always," written across the fuselage. She looked up and said softly, "Mr. Ethan, I want to be a pilot so I can take everyone together." Ethan knelt down, accepting the drawing with both hands, his eyes glowing with pride. "Then remember this," he said, gently placing a hand over her heart. "A pilot doesn't just fly a plane. They fly hope." That afternoon he left the academy and boarded a domestic flight to Chicago. No one recognized him. A flight attendant approached with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for flying with Horizon. Would you like coffee or tea?" He replied, "Thank you, just water." She nodded, but before turning away, she hesitated and said softly, "I don't know if it's really you, but if it is, Thank you for making this job something to be proud of again." Ethan smiled without confirming. He looked out the window where the golden sunset stretched endlessly reflected on the silver wings. The cabin was calm, filled only with the gentle hum of the engines, a melody he had long known by heart. As the plane ascended, he closed his eyes, letting the wind carry away the weariness of the past year. In his mind, he heard his mother's voice from long ago. "You don't need to prove you deserve a seat. You just need to prove why you're there." Ethan smiled faintly. Outside, the white clouds opened like a doorway. The horizon plane glided through, leaving a thin streak of light like the signature of justice written across the sky. 1 year ago, a man was asked to leave his first-class seat. Today, he made the world understand that no one was born to sit in the back, because dignity has no seat. It has only one place to live inside the human heart, dedicated to everyone who was ever told they didn't belong. From the perspective of an expert in leadership ethics and corporate culture, the journey of Ethan Miles is not merely the story of a first-class seat, but a test of how people choose to use power, whether to divide or to enlighten. True justice does not need noise, it only needs to be seen. If you believe this world needs more people who dare to stand on the side of what is right, then like this video, subscribe to the channel to spread that value, and comment below with the phrase that reflects your belief. Keep your dignity.